Welcome to FreeSBC on AWS. It's part of our how-to series showing how to install and configure Telco Bridge's powerful and flexible session border controller software. This session is focused on deploying FreeSBC on AWS or Amazon Web Services. And I guess it's widely recognized that AWS plays a leadership role in the market for cloud computing. And as shown in this graphic from Synergy Research, AWS is in a league of its own with a significant market share advantage over all others. But since the early days of cloud computing, there really have been concerns over whether hosting telecommunication applications and infrastructure in the cloud was a wise decision. Could the cloud computing infrastructure keep up with the real-time nature of voice and video? Would latency and jitter cause poor voice quality and echo? Honestly, during those early days, those were very real concerns. However, by making real-time communications a priority and through some key technology partnerships, Amazon and other cloud computing platforms have made significant inroads in telecommunications. Alliances with AT&T, Ericsson, and more recently Verizon have established AWS as a viable platform for large-scale telecommunications applications. And as noted in our February session, the trend is clearly recognized by the analyst community with an expectation that a greater percentage of the software that powers telecommunications will be operating in the cloud. And Greg Collins at Exact Ventures shared his expectations that by 2022, nearly 75% of all session border controller software will be cloud-based. And these are the reasons why Telco Bridges felt it's so important to extend the FreeSBC product portfolio beyond bare metal and virtualized software versions, today adding support for Amazon Web Services. Before we begin, just a couple of introductions here. I'm Alan Percy. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing for Telco Bridges and today's event moderator. And joining me again is Luke Morissette. He's the Director of Customer Support and one of the founders of Telco Bridges. And Luke, as always, very much appreciate your participating today.
Thank you, Alan. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. So what do we have planned for today's session? Well, first, we've covered the introductions, and we're going to move on and talk about three of the options for FreeSBC on AWS. We're going to give some specifics on performance and capabilities on AWS. Luke's going to show, actually go through the process of doing a configuration and implementation. And then we're going to move on and talk about some of the use case examples. We're going to share where you can learn more information, and then, of course, we'll wrap up with your Q&A, your questions, and other discussion at the end. So lots to cover today. So if you've been listening carefully over the last few weeks, you may have heard us use some new brands, including FreeSBC Pro Edition. Where we used to talk about FreeSBC and the paid subscription plans, we made a decision a little while ago to eliminate some of the confusion and give both proper names. FreeSBC Free Edition continues to be the free-to-use session border controller software, while the FreeSBC Pro Edition adds a number of enhanced features for analytics, media handling, CDR connectors, and high availability, as well as including excellent Telco Bridges technical support. We've added a new pricing page on the freesbc.com website that details the features and support commitments that are included in the free edition and compares that to the Pro edition. I encourage you to take a look at that at some point and scroll through it. So now on to what's new. To meet the needs of a very diverse range of applications, we've created three distinct offers of FreeSBC on AWS, and we want to step you through those right here. First is the AWS-hosted platform. This is an offer that gives the turnkey opportunity to evaluate FreeSBC in a fully hosted environment. It's offered at a flat fee of $500, and it includes 100 sessions for 90 days, and is hosted on Telco Bridges' AWS account. This offer includes Telco Bridges' premium 24/7 support during the entire period. The second is the Amazon Machine Image, or AMI, share of FreeSBC Pro Edition. Priced at $1 per session per year, this offer supports up to 60,000 sessions per server and is for production or evaluation purposes on the customer's own AWS account and includes standard support for the 1-year period. And our third and final is the AMI of the free edition. This also supports up to 60,000 sessions per server and is for production or evaluation, again, on the customer's AWS account, but does not include support. So I guess we've got 3 different options, and hopefully one of these 3 will fit in your situation. And our expectation is a lot of folks will start with the AWS hosted, get familiar with it, and then move to one of the other 2, either the AMI Pro or free edition offers. So moving on, then one of the questions that pops up often is, what ES2 or elastic compute instances are required, and does it perform? And this is, I'm sure, a lot of interest to folks. And we've done some very extensive testing on the range of EC2 platforms, all the way from the M4 large at the top of the screen all the way to M4 10X large. And what we've discovered here is some great scalability. If you can note here, the number of session establishment rate and the sessions with RTP anchoring. And again, that's where the media goes through the session border controller. We can support up to 4,800 sessions. And one of the things we did note here, so that these performance limitations are not the limitations of the software or the CPU. This is purely a limitation enforced by Amazon and their bandwidth limitations. And lastly, the sessions with RTP no anchoring. This is where the media would bypass the session border controller and go from endpoint to endpoint. And we'll talk about those applications in our use case examples. As you can see, we quickly jumped to 60,000 sessions, which is the maximum that we support with FreeSBC, either the free or the pro edition. So to answer the question, what can we support, which is obviously a pretty wide range, and does it perform? Yes. And one of the nice things about this is there's lots of other processing power left in these EC2 instances for other applications or other VMs if necessary. So a couple of limitations on the AWS that we thought would be important to share. Well, first of all, this initial 3.0.106 GA release does have a couple of limitations. One of them is that hardware-based transcoding at this point is not supported for obvious reasons. Because it's hardware-based, latency would be an issue. But we are working on software-based transcoding, and it's on the roadmap for early 2019. And obviously keep your eyes on that, as our developers, which you can see here on the screen, are hard at work working on a software-based transcoding solution. Secondly, is currently in this current initial release, the 1.1 HA is not supported. And this is just an interim problem that needs to be resolved, and they're currently working on a resolution to this particular challenge, and we expect to get that resolved very soon. So other than that, the FreeSBC with all the other functions as part of our regression testing has been validated to work on the Amazon platform just as it does on the VMware for the bare metal installations. So let's move on, and I'm going to ask Luke to join me here and to dive in and talk a little bit about the activation process and the mechanism to get registered and to get going with AWS.
Yes, so activation process here. First, I think we have to go on the FreeSBC site, right? Our FreeSBC where you can download your image. So in there, you will go and input your contact information. And then in one of the options there, you will have to choose what type of AWS platform you want to use. Okay, so the AWS hosted platform has a fixed cost, and you need to pay for that. But then after that, our support group will initiate an instance for you, and you will receive information on how to log in this system and start using it. So that's a fairly quick way to start using AWS. Alternatively, you can go with the Amazon image. AWS AMI. And then for this, you will need to share your account number and also the region in which you will use this image. So we will then share this image with you, and you will be able to start it. And the next slides are to show how you will start these AMI images to create AWS instances. The other thing you have to specify is the number of sessions, right, that your image can support. All right, so when we share the image with you, and it will be in your region and for your AWS account, then in your account, you need to access those EC2 services from AWS. That's where the image will show up, and you need to launch this image. All right, the image will be either a VSBC AMI or FreeSBC AMI, something like this. Then you will configure resources for this instance. So for example, with the table you saw before, I want maybe 500 calls per second and 2,000 channels of RTP anchoring. Then you need to use the C4.2x large instance type. Other options you need to set up for the image is the number of, or the quantity of disk you need to put there. And you need also to configure the security group. Once that is done, you can launch this image. And I will show you that in just a few seconds. Once you launch the image, you need to, you can allocate a permanent public IP to the instance so that it will remain the same IP even if you restart the instance for some reason. You need to start that instance, and then you can log into this FreeSBC. The login information is the IP address that you will find, and I will show you how to find that. And then you need to put the port 12358 there. Once you log in the first time, you need to enter your product key and activate your license. So let me show you this right now, these steps. So this is the FreeSBC TechnoBridges site, right? So you go there initially, and once you have this, you can go all the way down here and download your FreeSBC. And as explained by Alan, you need to choose the free or the pro session. So if you choose, for example, the free session here, you have to put your information, and at some point here, you need to choose your platform, right? So then you can, as explained in other webinars, the VMware or the KVM bare metal platform type, or these are the two new ones that we've just added. So the shared AMI or the hosted. So once you choose this and complete the information, you can download. Here, what you will get as a download is a product key that you'll be able to use for the AMI. Once you do that, we'll get this information, and we will share this AMI with you, and you will need that product key you will receive with the email. All right?
So far, so good.
Excellent. Next, you need to log into your AWS account, right? So here I have my support group account, and once you log into these services, you need to use the EC2 services. All right. So the EC2 dashboard here has a lot of information, but the one we want to use is the AMIs. Here, once you get into your AMI page here, two things you have to do. One is choose the region, right? So for us, we use the Canada Central region, but of course you will choose the one that suits you best. And that's where we will share this AMI image. Next thing you have to do is choose private images, because these are shared privately for each of the customers. You will have maybe more than one image, but the one we want to use here is the FreeSBC AMI. And the version here, well, it could change over time, of course, but right now we have 30106, which is the one we use. So you can select that FreeSBC image and launch it. So first thing you do here, choose your instant type. So you see here, you have the option of using the T2 nano, micro, small. This is not suitable for the FreeSBC. You have to go a bit lower and then choose maybe M4 large or M4X large, according again to the performance table we saw before. And for example, some of them like M4 16X large may not be useful. So this will not give you more capacity or performance than the M4 10X large, for example. So you really have to follow this, performance table. And if you want, you can confirm with us the size and we can help you to choose which instance type. So here I will choose the M4 large, which is here, I think we see it, two CPUs and 8 GB of memory. So here, next step is not to review and launch. We want to configure some of the instance details. So you click on the right side here. Next page is some of the details here. You will see some use cases later, and sometimes you may need to use a specific subnet or network. In our case, we will skip this. Next step is to add storage. So here you want to use 40 GB of disk, and we prefer the SSD option for the FreeSBC. The other thing to do here is delete on termination. That's an option to shut down this volume after you have terminated the instance. Very good. So step number 5, add tags. We don't need to do this. We can go to the next item, which is configure security group. Security group here is to protect the instance from external access. However, our FreeSBC already has all those security settings. So you can choose here all traffic, and then the FreeSBC will do the rest of the job to protect the system. However, if you know only some system will access it, or from external systems, then you could reduce the scope of these firewalls. Next step, review and launch. So here you will get some information. Of course, it tells you your security group is open to the world, but we know that our FreeSBC will protect you against that. And then you have other information. Here you can review all your setups that we have changed here and launch the image. All right. Once that is done, you will get a new instance. So you have to click here on instances, and you will see the instances that you have created. Here I have like a few of those which are used for different options, okay? So the important thing here is to find out, well, first you can rename, right, your FreeSBC to something useful, so you can recognize it when you get to the AWS dashboard again. And then you need to get this IP address, right? So the IP address will be how you will reach this SBC. So here for my test, it's the FreeSBC webinar A6 that I have been using, and it's already started. But if you want to start it, you have to click on it, instant state, and start it. Then you will be able to have access to that instance. All right. Well, mine is already running here, and I have this IP here, 35.183.196.239. And this is what I used here to access my FreeSBC. So when you get there the first time, you will need to enter your product key. I already did this, so I can just log in here. Here the password is also set at the startup time. So I put a password on this FreeSBC.
And just a reminder, the
Yeah.
product key is sent to you by email.
Yes.
The registration process.
Yep, exactly. So here, then you can go and package the licenses. Here you will have your product key that you have entered initially. The host name here is created automatically by AWS, and it is not recommended to change that. And the first thing you will need to do after you log in is to get or renew your license. All right. So once you do that, then it will install this this license, either the Pro version or what you have chosen, and then you'll be able to start working with your FreeSBC. The specific things that you have on the AWS installation, first you will see on the right side up here that this is a AWS instance. Okay. Next thing you will have is the interfaces. So we have made the AWS able to use only one interface. So you will have both the management and the SIP and RTP traffic using the same interface. So this is a particularity from AWS and not available yet on other FreeSBCs running on other types of platform. Okay. You can, however, add more IP interfaces to that. You have to go back to the EC2 instance here and add more network interfaces. So that is possible to do. Last thing that is different in the AWS instance is since we're using AWS, NAT traversal is always used because it goes through the AWS network. And when you go to NAT, we have a new option here is to choose automatically find out what is the public IP of AWS. So you don't really have to worry about NAT traversal anymore. All right, so this is automatically configured, and you can assign it to any of your SIP interfaces and even RTP interfaces. All right. So that's it for the demonstration. We can go back to the presentation.
Slides. All right. So do that, and I pulled up the slide with the differences that you just were talking about.
Yeah. Oh, and the last thing, yes, I forgot about that one. The SSH access is now done with a key. So when you launch your instance, it will ask you to insert a key. So they will, we will then be able to access the system if you need to, because sometimes you want to access the console commands. And to do this, you need to have a specific key for AWS. And that's
Awesome.
it. That's all those are all the differences.
Very good. Excellent. Appreciated the walkthrough and the quick demo. And I think at this point, you would pick up with the rest of the configuration of FreeSBC, much like any of either the bare metal or the VMware. You would continue on through the configuration process just as before. And of course, we documented those in earlier webinars earlier this summer for both the again, for the bare metal and VMware implementations, and those are on the video library, which we'll talk about in just a few moments.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about some use cases and where do we envision this being used. We've got a couple prepared here. One of them is in cloud-based contact centers. We envision this fitting nicely into cloud-based contact centers, and this particular example here shows with some work at home agents using either an ACD or a dialer platform that's hosted in AWS, and in the same subnet would then be a session border controller, and that that is mentioned earlier. We talked about some of the setting up security in the subnet. These two would find themselves on the same subnet in the same cloud platform, providing interoperability and protection with SIP trunk providers, primarily with the DOS and denial of service protection, possibly call rate limiting. All right, with the dialer, it's possible that you may want to manage the call rate performance, call routing certainly, and resolving some interoperability issues potentially between different SIP trunking providers and the dialer or the ECD. And one of the last things might be either ANI or caller ID substitution, customizing what goes out in the caller ID for outbound contact centers. So we see this as potentially being a very valuable use case. Another one is also working with CPaaS providers. And this is a little different environment. This is where you might end up working with a CPaaS provider like Twilio or one of the others on the marketplace. And of course, they've already got their own cloud infrastructure. And a lot of them, they offer you their own SIP trunking. But we've run into situations where people have come to us and said, no, I've already got a contract with a SIP trunk provider. I don't want to use somebody else's SIP trunk. I want to consolidate my traffic, and I've got a great rate with a provider, or I'm trying to reach certain geographical areas that would require a particular SIP trunking provider from a pricing and costing standpoint. So they want to integrate to that provider. Now that provider, of course, is kind of set in their ways and has a certain interface for working with them. So to get the two of these to talk to each other, a session border controller would be required to resolve some interoperability issues in between the two. And since the SBC really, to get it to operate in the Twilio environment, they're not just going to let you put your software in their environment. And same thing too with a SIP trunking provider, that by hosting the SBC in AWS, you can play sort of a third-party arbitrator between these two platforms, allowing traffic to pass smoothly between the CPaaS platforms and SIP trunking providers. And some of the tasks would be, of course, interoperability, SIP header manipulation, possibly dial plan fix-up, all kinds of things that happen in, SIP interoperability issues. We've run into situations where the fully qualified domain name needs some kind of mapping or correction, which we've undertaken for Twilio interface or interoperability. Intelligent call routing, certainly, if calls coming out of the Twilio platform for an outbound application, route into the appropriate SIP trunking provider, and also supporting media bypass, which we talked about earlier, and of course how important that is in scaling and managing the cost of operating the software in the AWS environment. And of course, last but not least is cloud hosted, so that it can stand alone in the AWS environment. Another third use case we envision it operating in is where a service provider has chosen to put, let's say, their softswitch. In this particular example here, it's FreeSWitch, maybe in a redundant environment in AWS, and we've got one customer who's actually using this configuration, where they've got fully redundant FreeSWitch servers on AWS. And to then provide security, interoperability, and routing for them, for those FreeSWitch servers. They're putting redundant session border controllers in the AWS environment to front end that. And of course, what that gives them then is, with those dotted lines, is fully redundant failover paths, so that if either an SBC or a FreeSWitch were to crash, the traffic can be rerouted to either, continuing to operate either SBC or FreeSWitch server, providing very high reliability for their services that they're offering to the end customers. And this requires, not only the ability to do failure detection and redirection, but also some performance measurement to be able to manage the traffic between the two and do some load balancing between the different providers. So one last thing we wanted to share with you before we move on then is where to get some more information. And of course, we've mentioned this on almost all the webinars. There's 3 key resources, starting with our video library, which is where we put all the recordings of all these webinars, and we've got some other content up there, including the installation process we talked about a little bit earlier. The wiki, which now has the step-by-step detailed instructions for AWS installation. In addition to that, too, those performance charts that are posted on that wiki. And then, of course, the forums, which is where you as our customers, with or without support, can post questions. And time permitting, our staff or our partners may offer some responses to your questions or needs on the forums platform. So those are 3 resources that you can go to for additional information. Of course, in addition to the freesbc.com site where all the product information exists. And we're also going to a handful of industry events over the next couple of months. In just a couple of weeks, we're headed to Astricon. We've got a couple of speaking sessions, and we're also going to be there with a booth. And would love to, if you happen to be at Astricon, would love to have you stop by and visit with us. It would be best if we set up an appointment ahead of time. The week following them, we're headed to the IIT Illinois Institute of Technology Real-Time Communications event. To talk about a concept that we've been working with some of our partners called the Intelligent Edge. And in that presentation content, what we're going to be doing is talking about how we're seeing trends in the industry that move the intelligence that used to be in the core of the network to smart devices on customer prem or in remote locations. And this is where low cost, high performance software like FreeSBC fits particularly well. So we'll be talking about that in Chicago, October 15th through 17th. We also have representatives headed down to Futurecom a little bit later in October, and there's an opportunity to meet up with them down in Sao Paulo. And later this year at SIPNOC, we just found out that we've got a speaking session there too to talk about a couple customer case studies and about that intelligent edge in Herndon, Virginia. So a bunch of great opportunities to get together, and a way to book some time for specific meetings to make sure we have the resources together is go to calendary.com, L&D Percy, and then we can set up some time both on my calendar and also the people that'll be at the event. All right, so let's move on to the Q&A. I saw a few questions trickle in here, so let's just quick grab them here and see what we got going for those questions. So I'm sure, Luke, you've had a chance to peek at a couple of these, so let's start with the first one, which is the differences between the AMI and the AWS-hosted platform.
Yes, I saw
that.
The AWS hosted means that it's telco bridges that will launch the image, and we give you the credentials and the information to log in that system and access it, right? So then you can just go and configure it and start using it, right? The AMI is shared with you. So what we do is we give you the link to launch this image, launch this instance, and then use that. Okay.
And it probably goes even farther than that, right? So the AWS hosted, if somebody came and said, "Hey, this is a particular configuration for the SBC because it's a paid engagement and includes support," we'd even walk them through the actual configuration process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So let's see. George understands it works with any virtual IP PBX, and of course, the word any is kind of dangerous, but I guess the response to that is yes. The FreeSBC does work with a very long list of IP PBXs, and we've only run into a couple of cases where there's been some snags that we've had to make modifications. I don't know, Luke, you got any thoughts on that too?
I do. Let's say we have made more tests with asterisks, also the 3CX and FreePBX, which is also using the asterisk framework. But these are the ones we use most for our tests, and I think it's also the ones that are most popular out there. So.
Right. But it goes way beyond that with BroadSoft and all kinds of other platforms that we've worked with, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Good. And then George also asks, does it have to be hosted on AWS? Is there a way to put it on a private data center? And of course, the answer is yes, and that's why we have the VMware and the KVM versions of the software. But today, we're just focusing our conversation on the AWS version of it.
Yes.
Yeah. And we have many, obviously the majority, all of our customers up till this point have been using either bare metal or either VMware or KVM versions of the software, and usually in a private data center configuration. So plans to extend the hosted AWS from eval to longer production support. And now this is a careful question and a careful answer. So Our expectation is that our service provider customers would like to offer FreeSBC as a service, and we feel it best that our service provider customers who have not only the infrastructure but the personnel to create offerings of a session border controller as a service would be best. So we are not planning on offering AWS as a hosted service beyond what we're talking about here, the 100 sessions for 90 days purely for evaluation. Our hope is that our again, our service provider customers would then take this software and build as a service offerings for their customers and take it way beyond what we could ever do, and also, you know, that expertise of managing over the long haul. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, please do drop it in. All right. So next, Dave also asks, do we have a version for Azure? And at this point, we don't, although we'd love to learn what the opportunity that he feels is for Azure. Obviously, you saw on the market share slide, Azure was a significant player in the cloud space, and we have heard it pop up, and we're kind of collecting requirements for delivering a version for Azure. So moving on. Yeah, so then Dan, thanks for joining. Comment on data charges and infrastructure charges, and maybe Luke, we could dig into this a little bit. So one of the unique things about working with AWS and some of the cloud platforms is infrastructure charges. Maybe could you explain what that is?
Yep, absolutely. So when you run an instance, of course, you have to pay, and that's why we show different instance types. Because if you don't need to have 4,000 simultaneous sessions, you won't take that instance type, because it's going to be more expensive to run that instance type. And then the other thing you have is if you add more elastic IPs, if you have more IPs to your systems, you will need to pay for each of those IPs you add in the system. The first one is free, but the others you have to pay. And the other thing you have to be careful about is the traffic. And I think that this question is more towards that. If you run a lot of traffic, well, there's some basic traffic that you can run, which is free, right? But if you go over a certain limit, and I think for each of these instance types, the limit could be different. And then if you go over that, then you need to pay for this bandwidth. And it is not necessarily cheap, right? So that's why one of the things that we propose is to use the no-incurring version, which then we only do the SIP transfers or SIP signaling on the FreeSBC, and then run the RTP outside. But if you still need to run it, yes, you can still run it. Run the RTP through the FreeSBC as proxying the RTP. But then we have to be somewhat calculating how much bandwidth will be used as an average over the month. And then you will know if you go over this free bandwidth usage. If you go over, then you'll need to pay more.
A lot like your cell phone data plan. Each one of them comes with a certain amount of data they can use for the period, and if you go over, they charge you addition. And we've learned from some of our early adopters that you have to really watch that carefully. Again, much like your cell phone, right? You go over, it can get very expensive very quickly. And I think the quote from one of our customers was, I don't know how my $100 a month server budget suddenly turned into $1,000, but I have to get to the bottom of it, and it was from the infrastructure charges and the data bandwidth charges, the overage. So it is something you need to plan for and be careful of to make sure that you know what you're going to be charged for those data things.
Yeah, so, and overall for the instance and for the elastic IPs, it's pretty cheap, right? It's really pretty cheap, except the bandwidth charge could be, you know, if it has to be under control, otherwise it can cost you some money.
Yeah, it can get expensive, so just be careful of that and plan for it. I guess that's the key thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So one last chance here for some questions. I appreciate everyone for submitting their questions, and we'll give you a second here. And If not, then looks like we're at the bottom of the list here. So a couple of closing comments. And Luke, first of all, I want to thank you for sharing your experience and the work of preparing for today's content.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our audience for spending some time with us today. And as we noted in the opening housekeeping, we're receiving the Telco Bridges newsletter email in a couple of days. That'll have a link not only to the slides, but also a recording of today's event, which will be on our video library, and the other sessions we talked about, the installation and activation process of the FreeSBC software, can also be found on that video library. Also, too, feel free to share this email and content with others in your network who might find it useful. And that's it from here. And we're going to wish everyone a wonderful day and wish you good luck and look forward to working with you on their AWS deployments.